Magical Lyney will make your enemies disappear, and today I'm gonna tell you how to build him best. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So what artifacts does this silly magician desire? None other than 4-piece mayonnaise hunters. Ah yes, a classic. A ton of his damage share is charge attacks, including his skill nukes, which you would expect to be skill damage, because his nuke is actually the detonation of his funny cat, which counts as charge attack damage. Therefore, if a 2-piece is buffed to charge attack damage makes it a prime choice for the lad. Being able to offer up to 36% crit rate is an insane boost to his numbers too. Easily his best in slot choice. Otherwise, 4-piece Gilded Dreams is a fine alternative. Assuming that you're playing his vape teams, you can use the EM quite nicely. The attack percent is cool too. If you play him in Mono Pyro, then you can trade some more of the EM for extra attack percent, which is nice for that team. Definitely use Hunters over this if you can, but this is a fine alternative. Wanderer's Troop works too, thanks to the buffs it offers Lyney's charge attacks, plus some extra EM from the 2-piece if you're playing vape. Though the crit rate from Hunters is a lot better than the extra charge attack percent. Even so, it's a sublime alternative if you have good substats on the set. 2-piece mix and match sets include 2-piece pyro percent, charge attack percent, EM, attack percent, burst percent, and skill percent. As for Lyney's main stats, simple. You have 2 options with him. First, you can go for EM, pyro percent, crit percent. This is specifically for vape. Don't use it for his other teams, but this is going to be his strongest choice when playing Farina with him. These percentage comparisons, which are based on his vape teams, illustrate what I mean quite nicely. However, if you use instructors on your Bennett, then attack percent becomes more competitive due to avoiding diminishing returns. But even then, EM Sans is better on vape Lyney by a few percentage. However, you can also go for attack percent, pyro percent, crit percent. Attack percent will be the most consistent across all of his teams. It can be useful in his vape comps too, since if you miss a vape, then your damage won't completely fall off of a cliff. However, even if you miss some vapes but land a few with an EM Sans, it'll at the very least be on par with an attack percent Sans, if not always better. But if you're looking to play him in non-vape comps, or if you generally want more consistency due to the unpredictable nature of vape Lyney, then an attack percent Sans is the way to go. As for substats priority, simple, go for this. EM is equally as important as attack percent, but if you aren't playing vape, then ignore it. You want to meet his ER requirements as you would for any unit, especially because of how strong his burst's nuke is. Then there's of course crit percent and attack percent as you'd expect. Bursting on Lyney can provide you valuable iframes while doing a big nuclear blast of pyro damage. He doesn't demand much ER-wise, so you should collect enough from substats passively. There's no real reason to steer away from 4-piece hunters. The domain is insanely efficient, and it boosts his main share of damage excellently. His alternatives are good too, but farm up a hunter set as soon as possible. These percentages are based on vape, so note that EM would be worse in non-vape teams. A magician needs the right props to amaze his audience, so which will Lyney desire? None other than the first great magic. This was tailor-made for him, so it's no wonder that this is his best in slot. Tons of crit damage and a passive which works with his kit perfectly. In vape, you'll achieve 2 movement stacks and 2 attack percent stacks. In Mono Pyro, 3 attack percent stacks and 1 movement stack. Both are really good for his kit and will cause a huge increase to his output. Definitely his best in slot choice. Lyney mains are all winning in 5.2 since Chaska's weapon is shockingly good on him. His charge attack and burst damage gets a big increase while also benefiting from a ton of crit damage percent from the weapon's main stat. If you end up losing to this, well then congratulations, since this also happens to be one of his best in slot picks. Aqua Simulacra is also a super powerful pick. Tons of crit and a wonderful direct increase to the damage he deals if you're close enough to the enemy. However, you have to be strategic to make sure you don't get hit if you want to take full advantage of Simulacra, considering that you have to sacrifice plenty of range. Besides, both his burst and skill want you to be close to the enemies in the first place, so it works well with his kit. T-Pulse is only a crit stick, but because of the 5-star stats, it still manages to be excellent on him. Polar Star is also very impressive for similar reasons, even if you can only manage a few stacks on average. It's pretty straightforward when it comes to both this choice and T-Pulse. Every other 5-star weapon will be better than any 4-star choice on him. Lyney's very fond of having a 5-star weapon. If you have a 5-star weapon and are wondering if it'll work on him, the answer is yes. Scion of the Blazing Sun is an excellent battle pass option for him thanks to the charge attack buffs and the passive of the option. The additional crit rate is also pretty neat. It does benefit indeed from refinements too, but even R1 is quite good on him. Fantastic Lyney option. If you're one of the 2 people who didn't skip the TCG event, then Ibis Piercer works as a free-to-play pick thanks to the EM after using charge attacks. It'll be worse if you aren't playing vape Lyney. However, if you're looking for a craftable choice, then Song of Stillness will be your best bet. It's the best of Lyney's free-to-play options and is good across all of his main teams. It'll be better than most of his 4-star options, so if you don't have Scion or Ibis Piercer, then no need to diverge from choosing this. These calcs are based on Vape Lyney, but the only real thing that changes is that EM in the weapons becomes less valuable. Otherwise, his best in slot choices remain pretty much the same across the board. He'll still be a fantastic unit when used on Stillness, but his 5-star picks are definitely an upgrade. Yes, he is still worth using on Stillness. So who will be a part of Lyney's magic show? I'll start off by listing the best teams that he has, then after I'll discuss their rotations and how to play them because Lyney's a complicated character. First off, Vape teams. These will consist of Lyney, Furina, Bennett, and then either Kazuha or Shilonen. There's a slight rotation difference depending on whether you use the Ronin or DJ, but we'll get onto that when I talk about Lyney's rotations. There's also Zhongli if you'd like to sacrifice some buffs in exchange for better survivability. These are his best because vaping Lyney's huge nukes is an incredible increase to his damage. Even if you miss some vapes, it'll still end up being his absolute best in slot team. You miss out on Lyney's pyro passive in exchange for huge vape nukes alongside all of our beloved Hydro Archon's damage bonus percent. You can actually learn to time the vapes even considering Furina's Hydro wrapping consistencies, but that's pretty hard to do at first. Even so, you'll experience his max potential in these teams. Plus, once you've played him more, vape timings aren't that hard to do. In situations where you want more AoE, you can swap Kazuha or Shilonen out for Xiangling, which also ends up fully filling out his pyro passive, so all's well that ends well. Mono Pyro was intended to be his de facto pick, and even if vape is better, this is still a very powerful Lyney choice. You'll enjoy a comfortable amount of consistency while dealing a crud ton of nuclear pyro damage. The most common setup here will be Lyney, Bennett, Xiangling, and either an Anemo or a Shielder. Wonderful option for the lad. His burning teams pretty much replace Xiangling for Emily, increasing the team's overall damage, especially considering that Bennett is around. With that being said, you do miss out on a stack of the pyro passive, but the Perfumer's damage is 100% high enough to justify that loss, as you'll still end up doing more overall team damage. This is a better alternative to his mono pyro teams, maintaining both the consistency of those comps while also improving upon the team DPS numbers. Finally, we have Overload. This will consist of the Femboy himself, Bennett, Chevreuse, and Fischl. The team feels pretty bad to play in all honesty, and even if you completely fill out his pyro passive, just use mono pyro instead. It'll still be a strong team, but out of all of the choices that you have available to you, it'll be Lyney's weakest. If you have no limited 5 stars, then a comp of Lyney, Bennett, Xiangling, and TDDS Sucrose or Lynette would be his best free-to-play team. There are 2 potential free 4 stars here, with the other being one of the most common 4 stars to find on limited banners, so you should be able to form this team pretty quickly. Then for the crash course on how to actually play these team archetypes, feel free to rewind and watch the rotations over if you want to watch them more closely. I'm going to put everybody on an unleveled weapon in order to not kill the overworld boss immediately. This is for the rotation's sake. This was a highly requested section, so hopefully it's helpful. Feel free to ask further questions in the comments. First off, vape rotations. I'll go over the vanilla double twink setup, then discuss the differences when you use Shilonen instead. So, let's go. Furina skill, Furina burst, Bennett burst, Bennett normal attack assuming C6, Kazuha tap skill plunge, Lyney charge attack 3 times, uses burst, uses skill nuke, charge attack until up times run out, and repeat. There's no specific timing as to when you're supposed to use his burst, you can use it for iframes too. If you're using Shilonen, the main difference in rotation is that you start with a Lyney charge attack to apply pyro and stow away a stack. Use Shilonen's skill Res Shred and Crystallize, then don't return to her after using Bennett's burst. From there onwards, the rotation is the same. Then for mono pyro, use 1 Lyney charge attack, use Kazuha's ult, then Bennett's burst, Kazuha's tap skill plunge, Xiangling's skill into burst, then charge attack with Lyney 3 times, ult then skill nuke, then charge attack until you're finished and repeat. Then for burning, use Emily's skill then burst, then Bennett's burst, Kazuha tap skill plunge, then charge attack with Lyney 3 times, ult then skill nuke, then charge attack until you're finished and go again. And finally, his overload teams. Do a Lyney charge attack, use Fischl's burst for the first rotation so that you can trigger overload with Chevreuse, Chevreuse hold skill next, then Bennett's burst, then use Fischl's skill to respawn Oz, then charge attack with Lyney 3 times, ult then skill nuke, go charge attack until you're finished, and then prepare to rinse and repeat. The main thing you want to make sure of for all of these teams is that you have 4 to 5 stacks every time when you use his skill nuke. Also, something to be aware of, that massive nuke that pops off when you use his skill, that's not only skill damage, it's him detonating his goofy cat and has that he generates from using his charge attacks, with the other 60% of the damage coming from his skill. A large share of that is charge attack damage, however. Following these team rotations should get you the best result for all of those comps, but make personal adjustments as necessary. If you're using a shielder outside of Overload, replace the non-Bennett buffer's field time with the shielder setting up their protection. Yet how does this goofy little magician work? Well, his normal attacks, despite having sick card animations, don't do anything on their own. It's his charge attack that you want to pay attention to. When you hold it for long enough, a fire cat symbol appears and he generates this cat in a hat. Every time you shoot a fire cat charge attack with him, the one currently on field will explode and he'll generate a new one. The damage from them counts as charge attack damage. Also, if you don't detonate his cat in a hat with another charge attack, for example in rotations where you start with a single Lyney charge attack, don't worry about it, it'll explode on its own. You gain 1 stack for every cat in a hat that you fire off, and you can have up to 5 stacks. He drains his HP every time he fires off a cat as well, which is how he consistently procs 4-piece hunters. At C0 you can only have 1 hat on field at a time, and it can also act as an enemy taunt, which is pretty neat. His skill will detonate the current cat in a hat on field, with his skill increasing its nuclear damage based on how many stacks he has at a time. The cat hats aren't affected by buffs. That counts as charge attack damage, not skill damage, so don't build him around skill percent buffs. AKA avoid Golden Troop, no it's not worth it. As for his ult, he'll turn into a cat in a hat, then deal a big AoE Pyro Blast upon enemies. You can swap out or use his skill to cancel this early, and his ult will both generate 1 cat in a hat from his Fire Cat charge attack while additionally granting him a skill nuke stack. You'll mostly use this ult for iframing and acquiring extra stacks. It allows you to effectively dodge while not losing out on damage completely, if that makes sense. It also has the niche use of being a fast way to travel across the Abyss Arena to the next wave of enemies if you end up killing your current targets with his ult. As for his Ascension passives, simple. His A1 rewards his HP loss mechanics by both resolving any energy concerns that you may have with him and offering him an extra attack percent multiplier. Yes, EM is still drastically better in Vape even with this being taken into consideration. As for Lyney's A4, he'll gain an extra damage dealt increase for each Pyro party member in his team, stacking up to 100%. It also asks you to have the enemies themselves be actually affected by Pyro, which we ignore in Vape. While this is indeed a fantastic A4 buff, don't let it fool you. His best teams will only ever access up to 80% of this, since he's pretty glued to Bennett, but would prefer to sacrifice a third Pyro for another teammate like Farina or Emily. If you can max it out, that's nice, but don't prioritize this over effective Lyney team building. As for his talent priority, simple, go for this. All of his abilities are important as he's a main DPS, yet even with that in mind, you should focus on his normal attacks first and foremost because that's where his charge attack skillings are stored. His skill nuke is a massive source of his DPS, so level it up as even though it's more of a detonation, it still provides better buffs per charge attack stack if you level it. His burst can do a gnarly bit of damage too, so make sure you level it up. You prioritize it over the skill because the skill can't vape everything 100% of the time, and a lot of the damage is cat hat damage. I'd personally recommend the layout of 10-9-9, but if you want to save resources, 9-8-8 works too. Lyney's the most famous magician in Fontaine, so naturally it isn't going to be cheap to watch one of his shows. Time to pay up for Constellations. Having an extra cat in a hat per rotation is absolutely huge for this guy. These cat in a hats are such a large part of his kit, so his C1 is genuinely unfathomably busted. He also gains stacks way faster, meaning that you can get through his rotations quicker, equaling more damage over time. Not to mention how 2 cats at once equals doubling his skill nuke detonation output. Yeah, to say the C1 is good is an understatement. You can get up to 60% extra crit damage with this, so make sure you've maxed this out before doing his massive skill nuke. Considering how much free rate he gets from hunters and how a huge portion of his damage is within super large hits, this is a massive boon to his output. Excellent C2 plus very easy to get going. Upgrading his normal attacks by +3 equals upgrading the main source of his damage, so naturally this is busted. Lovely C3, great early constellations thus far. I'd have bumped this up to 40% since Gene C4 is 40% and that's a standard 5-star. Regardless, I can't be too picky since this is stacked on top of the buffs from his previous cons, and those are seriously no joke. Good con, and unlike many C4s in this game, yes, it's worth going for this on its own, but I'd prioritize Farina cons first before going beyond Lyney C3. His burst nuke is even meatier now, so good stuff. You get a lot of damage out of this, so it's a pretty nifty upgrade. We're back at it, essentially doubling Lyney's damage output. Incredible C6. Good luck trying to finish your rotation since you'll have killed everything by the second charge attack if not the first already. It's mechanically pretty self-explanatory, so nothing much for me to explain here. In terms of his Primogen based investment, I pick up his main weapon first because it's such a boost to him over other options. Plus, losing to Choska's bow is still a really good thing considering how good it is on him, so no better time than now to get him a 5-star choice. Then go for C1 up to C2, then it's up to you if you want to get more or not. They're all pretty good, so you can't go wrong here. As for teammates, Furina's C2 to 3 and Shiloh and C2 are pretty excellent contenders. Kazuha's C2 is nice for vape, but the DJ's buffs have better uptime in general, so I'd opt for her instead. She buffs HP percent at C2 as well, so that helps Furina's damage. I'm not sure what cruel joke Hoya was playing by rerunning one of the best DPSs in the game a patch before Mavu Ika, not to mention that Nuvalet, the de facto best in slot DPS in this game, is coming up after Lyney. It's definitely bait on Hoyo's part. With that being said, this guy is incredibly worth your time, and if you're into rewarding, albeit challenging gameplay, his nukes will knock your socks off. And he has a boundless amount of potential which you can tap into over time. He's certainly a learning experience, but give it some time and you'll find your way with him. He's got stockings and a cute smile as well, so to be honest, he's irresistible. Hopefully this video was able to get your Lyney magically making his enemies appear in their graves. This has been Juice, signing out, and you know what they should have done, which would have given him a 100% DPS increase? Give him cat ears, Hoyo, you cowards!